Hey, great to have you here. So today we're going to be talking about Yellowjackets Season 3, Episode 3, titled Them's the Breaks. So we're going to follow a similar format here of me talking about the two timelines separately, giving my pros and cons, and then giving an overall episode rating at the end. As a reminder, if you haven't yet, please consider subscribing to the channel. I'd really appreciate it. Now on to the episode details. This time I'm going to start off with the adult storyline first. So with the adult side of things, we start off with Van in an appointment with her doctor. Kind of weird, her doctor's not wearing typical doctor outfit here, but that's a little bit nitpicking. But we have them talking, and we get kind of what I've assumed is going to happen this whole time, where we have them discussing that her cancer is now in remission, and it's kind of what I figured may be taking place here. We have the wilderness being happy that we sacrificed other people. Specifically, the one that came to mind was last season we killed off Natalie at the end. I thought maybe the wilderness would be happy and thankful for that, and maybe progress towards Van's cancer going away, or maybe I thought maybe in the season we would have Ty die to sacrifice to keep Van alive for the wilderness to be happy. Not sure we'll get that necessarily, but it seems like her cancer is going to remission at this point because we had Natalie die, we had the waiter die who was chasing after them, so not sure necessarily how he died, but those two things happening made the wilderness happy for the sacrifice and is rewarding Van at this point in time. We then cut to Shauna's house where Shauna's making breakfast, and Callie and Lottie slip out their own separate ways, but it's clear they're going to wind up reconvening later on. At the same time, we have Misty call Shauna, and they agree to meet up despite Shauna's kind of reluctance to do so. We then cut to Callie and Lottie meeting up with one another at the mall, and they're there shopping and talking with one another, and we have Lottie sneak a top into Callie's bag, and it winds up being over $1,000, and kind of being a bad influence on Callie, saying, hey, I'll just steal it, you're good with this. And we have Callie kind of think about it for a little bit, and she smiles to herself and winds up taking off, so they wind up shoplifting that top. We then cut to Shauna and Misty getting together at the restaurant, and they're just talking with one another and having Misty explain kind of what took place with Callie and Lottie the night before. And Shauna's like, why did we have to do this in person? Why couldn't we have done this over the phone? And clearly Misty's trying to be friends with Shauna, and Shauna's very transactional, saying, what do you want from me? Let's just take care of this and move on and go our separate ways. But Misty's really trying to connect with her here, and Shauna tries to make up excuses to go her own separate way. But Misty's kind of like, hey, I have no schedule. I can definitely join you. My meeting's canceled. We can do whatever you want. And Shauna's like, okay, I have to go buy this thing to make up for what happened with my husband last night at their meeting. And then rambles on further, kind of typical Shauna fashion here, just kind of says stuff in really dry humor tone to it, and has like, oh yeah, I have a podiatrist appointment. Just trying to make up some super personal excuse that would make her busy that Misty couldn't join for. But Misty's like, no, I'll join for that too, no problem. Which eventually we do have Shauna say, okay, fine, come along with me. We then cut to Ty and Van, and they reveal to each other what kind of took place, where we have Ty telling Van that the restaurant situation took place where we had the waiter die, and then we have Van telling Ty about the good news about her cancer prognosis maybe improving, and she's a little bit weary to really accept that because she realizes, hey, you never know, these things could be not super legit, but Ty is super thankful and really recognizes this is likely due to the wilderness thanking us for what we did. And Ty really considers this a blessing and winds up doing a bit of a ritual where she's lighting a candle and thanking the wilderness for all that they've done for her. Then cutting back to Shauna and Misty in the car, Shauna's brakes wind up going out, hence the episode title we have here. And we get a crazy driving scene here where she's kind of just aimlessly driving everywhere with the song Nookie by Limp Bizkit playing in the background. Shauna eventually is able to pull over in a park area where she puts the parking brake on, and she really just starts letting Misty have it, blaming her for the brakes going out, thinking that she messed with the car, and also blaming her for planting the phone in the bathroom from the prior night scene as well, which I've already talked about pretty clearly. They hinted at Melissa being the one who did that. By the way, we have Misty being really offended here, storming off as she's yelling at kids through the park. Then fast forwarding a little bit, we cut to Shauna coming home where she sees Callie and Lottie there making dinner and singing. Another great song here, the song that's like make your own kind of music, which I mostly know from the show Lost, which is pretty interesting here because I felt like the teenager storyline, some of it in this episode made me think of Lost specifically. So I'm curious to see if there's some inspiration potentially there. Shauna then sees that Callie's wearing Jackie's necklace and really freaks out, kicks Lottie out, and destroys the entire kitchen. Then we have Ty and Van at home on the couch, and they're watching TV, and we see an ice cream commercial here, and we have Ty realize the guy that she sees in the commercial is the person she's been seeing around town, so she looks up the ice cream place, and they wind up rushing off to the shop's location to investigate. Misty then arrives at home from her fight with Shauna, and she winds up burning a group picture. Not sure if there's going to be some ramifications there, but she burns the picture of her entire friend group, and at this point I assume she's realizing that Walter may have been right about her friends being pretty fake and not really being there for her, so kind of disappointing for her in this scene. We then cut to our last adult scene for the episode. We have Ty and Van breaking into that ice cream shop. They see a fox or coyote, whatever kind of animal that is, creature with a rodent in its mouth, and the implication here is that the wilderness wants to feed. So I feel like in some ways this was foreshadowing some things potentially going wrong in the future for the adult side of things. So then separately jumping to the kids storyline. So we start off the episode with Mari. I realized in the last episode review I talked about her being Mira. Her name's Mari, obviously. So we have her and the coach in the cave, and Mari's trying to flirt with the coach here. Kind of an interesting scene here where he's gay, obviously, so he's not really buying it. He pretty much shuts that thing down right away. She then tricks him, though, into coming over closer to her. She winds up grabbing his bear spray, spraying him in the eyes with it. Then he winds up grabbing it from her and spraying her back. So super goofy scene here. I felt like it was a little over the top because they were just kind of comically spraying each other with bear spray. But just kind of a silly scene here of them yelling at each other and just screaming on the ground, crying for their eyes being in pain. We then return to the coach and Mari talking. There's a lot of conversation between them two in this episode, and the coach is really freaking out about everything around him being real. And then we have Mari tell a story and suggest there may be two versions of reality, so interesting to see if that plays out in some way in the future. She then begs the coach to let her go and says she won't tell anybody about him. When we later return to these two, we have the coach approaching Mari with a knife, and she's freaking out, but it felt pretty obvious as the viewer here that he was going over there to cut her loose because she's tied up, which he ultimately does. She winds up then knocking him down and storming off, so kind of rude as far as how she treated him, considering how pretty much nice he's been to her, other than kidnapping her, obviously. We then see the other girls group for the first time in the episode, where we have Melissa approaching Shauna. They kind of flirt a little bit here and there before heading back to the tribe, where they're welcoming back Mari. At first, Mari doesn't tell them about the coach, and I'm kind of curious how the scene is going to play out, but they start to peer pressure her a little bit as far as asking questions as far as what took place, how did she get out of the hole that she fell into. So she does a complete 180 here after being questioned and rats him out. The group then, led by Shauna, demands to be taken to the coach's cave. The group then heads to that cave, where there's some decent horror suspense here with the lights going out on Van, before having really the final 10 minutes of the episode turned into one big acid trip. We have Shauna, Van, and Akila, one of the other girls, going further to find the coach. They start imagining different scenes here, where Van is in a cabin with a fireplace. We have Akila, who's been kind of the animal whisperer thus far. She's really been close to these rabbits and things like that. She winds up going up to these other animals, and she winds up talking to an alpaca or llama, whatever that creature is, but the creature is actually talking to her, and we assume here that the wilderness is talking through the llama or whatever that creature is, and it's telling her the wilderness is going to get what it wants. And then we have Shauna, who's in a lake, and she sees her boy on the shore, and she's unable to swim to him, so she's kind of doing the thing you do in your dreams where you're swimming, but you're not actually going anywhere. Suddenly, all three scenarios of Van, Akila, and Shauna go terribly wrong, and they wind up sinking into the floor. And then we focus on Akila here, and she's in school with the other girls. We see the guy that Ty's been seeing kind of roaming around the halls there. And then we also see Jackie in the classroom. I think it's the first usage of her in this season thus far. Suddenly, Shauna is being choked and is really bleeding from the neck, and Akila's trying to save her. Then we cut back to the caves where we have Shauna and Akila just laying on the ground, just out of breath entirely. And we have the coach grabbing Van, seeming like he saved her in this scene. And he says something about a poisonous gas that they've been breathing in. So curious to see if that's really what took place here as far as making them see these other visions. And we just have the episode close out with Natalie holding a gun at the coach's face, saying he's coming with them. So that recaps the main plot points of the episode. Running through some of the pros I had. Once again, I was a big fan of the music here. On top of that, I enjoyed the teenager storyline a little bit more. I feel like thus far I've really enjoyed the adult side, predominantly compared to the teenager side, but this one specifically in this episode, I enjoyed the teenager story, primarily with the coach and Mari's scenes that we had there, but also when we got some of those horror elements towards the end of the episode. And then finally, I like that we got some more visual representation of the wilderness via that coyote or that bagul-looking guy, and I hope that really continues. I mentioned Lost earlier, and that's something that frustrated me with that show. We had off-screen noises that took place a lot of times. Sometimes it's nice to get a payoff with some big bad creature, which hopefully we'll get more of as the season progresses. I'm also kind of wondering at this point if they're actually going to be found when they're out in the wilderness still, or if maybe the wilderness itself is going to save them by maybe creating some portal back to civilization or something like that. Who knows? As far as the cons go for this episode, for me personally, some of the scenes I feel like weren't too believable and a bit over the top. The one that comes to mind is the opening bear spray scene where you have them just spraying each other with mace all over the place. My second con would be I didn't really care for the adult or teenager Shauna in this episode. I've kind of mentioned this in the prior reviews, talking about some of these characters aren't overly likable, so hopefully that changes going forward. But on the teenager side of things, we had Shauna being really adamant to take down the coach. And on the adult side of things, I feel like sometimes we're really too silly where we're talking about, oh, the podiatrist appointment we got to go to. And then the other side of things, we have unrealistically destructive with throwing everything around in her kitchen. So kind of all over the place with Shauna's character for me. And then finally, while I liked some of those horror portions towards the end of the episode, some of the elements there were a little bit weird with those visions. Like, I feel like we got a little bit too silly at some points, having like the talking llama. Felt a little bit over the top once again there. But hopefully we will get more answers as far as what caused them to hallucinate. Now jumping to a score for this episode. As far as a rating goes, I'm going to give this one a very high neutral rating. So I thought about saying positive, and it's right on the edge of both of those two as far as neutral or positive. But there wasn't really enough here that stood out to me personally as far as taking it over the top as far as the episode goes. So we'll say neutral, but it's definitely a very high neutral rating. But what did you think? Were you a fan of this episode? What parts did you like or dislike? Are there any theories you may have as far as where they may take the story next? Sound off on all things Yellowjackets down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to talk to you again soon.